You're listening to the Creatorpreneur Podcast, Episode 1, and today I'm answering the 3 questions I most like to ask creative entrepreneurs. So, stay tuned. Hello, my name is Rodney Washington, author, artist, and entrepreneur, and I'm passionate about helping creatives just like you do what lights you up and make a comfortable living while doing it. Each week, I'll be sharing timely business growth, marketing, and mindset hacks and interviews with courageous creative entrepreneurs to inspire you to get paid for your creativity. So grab your favorite beverage, sit back, and enjoy today's show. Hello and welcome. I am so glad to have you here for the inaugural episode of the Creatorpreneur Podcast. This podcast has been quite a while in the thinking process, not so much the making, but the thinking process, and I'll share a little bit about that in a moment. As you recall from the introduction, my name is Rodney Washington, and I'm really excited to be here because this is something that, again, this is actually my second podcast. I had a podcast that I launched in 2013, I believe, called Get Paid for Your Creativity. And while I enjoyed very much the podcasting, doing the podcast and having the podcast, it was something that I, quite frankly, didn't fully understand what I was biting off. I actually bit off way more than I could chew. I tried to do 5 episodes a week of that show, which was insane. And actually, I had a friend and a client tell me as much. But at that time, I really didn't. I didn't think it was going to be that much work. So a podcast takes a lot more than I actually realized, not just in the planning of it, but in the production of it, and most importantly, the marketing of it after each episode is done. And I really didn't understand at that time and how much it would actually turn out to be. So while I loved having the show and I got some really great feedback from doing it, it just was actually more than I realized, and I eventually kind of burned out. I did too much too quickly and burned out, and I didn't keep it going, which is one of my biggest regrets. But I am so glad to be back. That's why I took some time to really think about my goals and what I wanted to do with the show and the purpose of the show. And to be really point blank about it, I love doing the podcast because I'm really big about finding your sweet spot communication style. For some, it's writing, which I love to write. For some, it's video, which is my least favorite. And my number one favorite is audio. I love to speak. I love talking. I love sharing ideas, and I love teaching more than anything. And so the audio format, i.e. podcasting communication style, really suits me best for my personality and my temperament and the way I like to communicate. So that's why I just kept kind of circling around in different ways I could, keep myself out there. And I realized I kept coming back to over and over and over again that the podcast model really is the best one for me. For you, it might be writing. Again, it might be, video. A video is very popular. And if you love video, of course, go all in. With YouTube and Facebook Live, it's a wonderful time to be involved in video. And I'm sure I will do more video too at some point. But my sweet spot is the audio. The podcast is my medium of choice. So that's what I'm doing. So anyway, as I said, this is the first episode of the podcast. And what I just want to do on this episode is sort of set the tone for the show and how it's going to go. So my plan right now is to produce a weekly show once a week. On Tuesdays is when we will launch a new episode. And then I will have bonus episodes from time to time, which will be interview-based shows. And for the most part, and I'm referring to those as master classes. So I will always announce on the weekly Tuesday show if there's going to be a bonus episode that week. And you can go and listen to those there. Right now, I haven't set up any interviews as of yet, but I'm sure those will be coming in time. And as those do come up, I will be setting those up and announcing them as well. Also, to make sure that you don't miss any of the bonus episodes, or any of the episodes, quite frankly, I'd like to invite you to sign up on our mailing list. You can go to getpaidforyourcreativity.com/57ways gift. That's a PDF and a audio that accompanies that PDF, where I teach or I share 57 sort of mindset hacks and ideas that you can use to keep yourself motivated, which I find is really important for keeping yourself motivated as an entrepreneur and running your own business, which requires a lot of us physically as well as mentally and emotionally. And so it's very important that we take care of ourselves in that way. And so I put this little book together a while ago, just as that little jolt of inspiration to kind of get you going during the day when you're first getting up, or as you're going through the day and you find sort of your energy kind of waning. It's a great way to keep yourself motivated and stay on top of that. Also, whichever platform that you're listening to the show on, whether it's iTunes or Stitcher or Spotify or I think it's Google Podcasts now, there's so many more now. Feel free to subscribe to the show, and that way you'll be notified inside of your app when a new episode goes live. As I said, my goal is every Tuesday a new episode will go live, with a bonus episode coming out probably on Thursdays from time to time. There will not be a bonus one every week, but there will be bonus episodes kind of sprinkled in there. So anyway, so what I wanted to talk about for the first episode of the podcast is really what propelled me in particular to become an entrepreneur. Hopefully it will inspire you to answer that question for yourself. Actually, I have actually 3 questions I'm asking myself, which I'm going to answer here on the podcast. And then my plan is to propose this question to other entrepreneurs, maybe possibly even you. What motivated you to become an entrepreneur, and I'd like to invite you to share your answers to one or possibly all 3 of the questions in a special way, and possibly be featured on future episodes of the podcast. And I'll tell you in a minute how to be able to do that. I also plan to ask this question of other peers and people that I'm inspired by, that I see, and ask them to share what inspired them, and then feature them on future episodes of the podcast. So I'd like to have like a little weekly segment that I have in each episode. Hopefully, fingers crossed, that's the plan, where I'll share possibly you or someone else who's answered that question. And again, the focus of the Creativepreneur Show is to keep you motivated and keep you focused. And more importantly, to inspire you to think of yourself as an entrepreneur, that you're creating yourself as much as you're creating your business. You know, if we think, what I see personally and what motivated or inspired me to create this show, and the topic and the focus and the title of the show, is there's a ton of information and content out there about, marketing and, how to build a business, basically speaking of the business from an outside perspective, meaning it's outside of you, but you're at the helm of everything. You're the one running everything. You're the one creating everything. So everything is dependent upon you and what you're doing and how you're feeling and how you're being and your actions. And, if you're having sort of a downtime, the business can be affected by your sort of feeling down. If you're feeling up and upbeat, it can be affected that way too. And so with that said, there's, again, a lot of information and content and podcast out there about the entity of the business. But I really wanted to focus a little bit more of the energy of this particular podcast on creating you as the creativepreneur. And that's hence why I decided to name the show that, Createpreneur. I want to change the myth from not the myth, but the idea that's out there in the world that you are just self-employed, which just to me means you just created a job for yourself, or you created a business that's kind of outside of you, but it really is not. It's not supporting who you are and the things and the challenges that you're going through. And so I wanted to have something that really talks about building you up and keeping you, you're the creative, you are the creator, and you are creative. And as the creator, it's about creating you as the entrepreneur. And the business, what I'll say the business, let me say it from this perspective, the product or the service that you exchange for money, that's a part of it. But again, that can change as you change. in future episodes of the show, we'll be talking about things like business models. I've seen lately a lot of people, especially in the starting a business online space, they've been changing business models. You'll hear a lot of things about, coaching, and people are doing high-end coaching, and then they're switching that over to courses, or they're switching from courses to membership programs, or they're getting out of the digital space altogether and moving to physical products or whatever. The point I'm making is that we change, we evolve, we decide we want to go for something, and we get in there and we roll up our sleeves and we do the work and we build the thing. And then we realize that that entity is no longer serving us on a deeper level. And I include the creativity part of it as well. So what I want to do is to create a platform here where where the focus is really on you and your self-care, and also on you giving yourself permission to pivot and adjust and do the things that you need to do, that you want, that really serve what you want to do and how you want to live. Because again, if you are, quote unquote, creating a business that basically gives you no time to take off, you basically can hardly ever take a vacation. If you basically don't work, you don't get paid. So basically it means that you can never ever take really any significant amount of time off, whether it's of your own choice or because of obligations in your life that sort of dictate that you need to take time away from your business. What I want to encourage and focus on with the Creatorpreneur podcast and the trainings and the interviews and the mindset information and all of that I share with you is that you actually build an entity that supports everything about you and who you are, wherever that stage of your life you're at. And that you're giving yourself the permission, even though maybe you've built up a business that maybe is doing really well, but it's draining you. I want to have this show be a place where it can motivate you to look at other models and shift and pivot if need necessary, because we are more than just work. Whether we have even the most unforgiving job, still for the most part allows us 2 weeks of paid vacation, where most of us who work for ourselves hardly ever take a vacation. For me personally, I haven't taken a vacation a real vacation, I would say, in many, many years. I love what I do, and so I don't think about it all the time. But, after a few years, you start thinking, when was the last time that I actually took a vacation that didn't involve me taking the laptop? So again, I love all of this online business stuff. I love, being your own boss and all of those things, all that languaging. But I also understand that, again, we're human and we're going to change. We're going to pivot. Our internal circumstances will change. Our external circumstances will change. And we need to be able to create something that allows us to pivot with it and still be able to earn a good living, but not be a slave to the thing that we've created. So I want the focus of the Creatorpreneur Show to be more about focusing on creating you as the creative entrepreneur, and then whatever the product and service as an extension of that can be shaped and molded and modeled based on where you are and where you need to go and what you want to do. So anyway, that's my focus for the Creatorpreneur podcast. So anyway, as I promised at the top of the show, I wanted to share 3 questions that I I'm going to ask myself an answer, and then I'd like to invite you to answer one of those questions, and I'm going to share a way for you to be able to do that. And then if I decide to, listen to those recordings, you can record yourself. I will possibly share your response on a future episode of the podcast. So let's jump into it for me. I was thinking as I was doing this, I should have had someone else ask me these questions, but it didn't come to me until just now to really do it this way. So I'm going to go ahead and ask the questions of myself and then answer them. So one of the questions that I am asking myself that I'm also want you to think about for yourself is, when was the exact moment when you knew you want to be an entrepreneur? For me, I've always been a kind of an independent thinker. I've never really felt like I fit into an overly structured organization, which I think is possibly a natural characteristic of an entrepreneur. Entrepreneurs tend to think outside the box, or at least think differently, and am not real comfortable with conforming to a very structured or organized institution. Entrepreneurs, in my opinion, or at least for me, I'm going to speak for me, not for everyone else, but for me, I'm not a huge person on authority. I don't really care for people lording over me or telling me where I need to be and when I need to be there and how I need to be there and all of that. That was one of the biggest things that made working for other people really difficult for me, because it just seemed to go against my internal grain to be in a situation where I didn't have control. And then when you couple not being able to have control over the environment sort of that you're in, but then you're relying on that for your money, your income, it just, to me, felt very debilitating and sort of depressing. Now, I started working at a very early age. I chose to go out and get a job when I was actually only 12 years old, washing dishes for my grandmother at a little cafe that she had. And I chose to do that, and made me think about this as I'm talking about it right now. I chose to take that job, even though I didn't have to work. My parents, it wasn't a need of money. I didn't need to contribute to the family. I chose to work. I chose to get a job because I wanted to pick what I wanted to wear at school. I started to develop an interest in clothing and what I wore, and my mother and myself, we did not see eye to eye on what I thought was cool to wear and what she thought was practical to wear. So in order to avoid the confrontations between the two of us, I asked if I could go get a job and buy what I wanted. And so that's what I did. And, I just kind of went from one gig to another as I pretty much worked all through school. Now, mind it, I didn't have a paper route. I didn't, whatever the things that kids do to, sell door to door. I didn't do stuff like that. I always had a job, but I did it more from the perspective of I wanted my own money to make my own decisions, to do what I wanted to do. That was really the catalyst for me as to why I went to work at such an early age. And even when I went into college, I didn't really feel a lot of need to focus a lot of attention on school. I really wanted to go to work. I felt, school was learning theory. Being out in the world working was actually going to teach me about the business that I wanted to be in at the time, or at least as connected to the career I thought I wanted to have at the time. And so, again, even though I didn't like to do the paper route thing and all that kind of stuff that, teenagers or adolescents, grow up into, I always had a job. Even though I didn't like the constraints of a job environment, but I loved the independence of having my own money and making my own choices to do what I wanted to do with my money without having to go through my parents to get it or whatever. If I could make my own money, I could do what I wanted. And that's really was sort of like, I didn't know at the time, but that was sort of the seeds of me having an independent nature that could be sort of the foundation of what it would be like to have my own business, which I didn't do till many years later. Now, as I got older, I started having side businesses. So I learned how to design websites back in the early or mid 90s, I should say. And so pretty much from basically the mid 90s to the mid 2000s, I always had what we now call side hustles. I call them side gigs. But I always had a side gig. So no matter where I worked or what I was doing, I always had something else coming in. And that was sort of my first entry into self-employment or working for myself, was doing, at that time, freelance web design. And I did that for many, many years. And actually now looking back on it, it's probably been closer to 20, 25 almost years, teaching myself web design, because I never went to school for it, and then doing it independently. So I would run ads in like a local little community newspaper in the Berkeley area of the Bay Area where I was living at the time. And that's how I got my first clients. And I eventually built myself up through that until I went to work for a .com company, which I was there before and really on the tail end of the first .com bubble burst. But again, even after all of that, I still continue to do things on the side. And I've always had a side hustle, if you will. And then in the mid 2000s, I transitioned. I was still working in corporate, working in the luxury hotel arena. And then I transitioned I always had a creative bent. I've always wanted to be an artist. And so I started with photography in the early 2000s and started a photography business. And then that's when I really went out on my own. And that one was when I left corporate and really started my own business. So I took sort of the web design background that I had, combined that with my new interest and new passion, photography, and then went and basically sold my services to local retail stores in the Los Angeles area. At that time, I was living at doing web design and photography for small retail environments. And then that transitioned into eventually writing a book and doing a telesummit and all these things I'll go into in future episodes of the podcast. The point I'm trying to make is that for me, I guess my first entry, or my first thought, or what inspired me or what motivated me to be an entrepreneur was the need for independence, the need for control over my money, to be able to do, I wanted money to do what I wanted to do without having to ask for permission. So that was sort of my first entry into entrepreneurship and why I chose to go into working for myself. Eventually, I think the kernel of it, though, was the independence and not feeling like I fit into corporate environments, which I very much did not want to continue doing. That's the question maybe you want to ask yourself. What was the exact moment, or what was the kernel of the idea that you knew you wanted to be an entrepreneur, that was really a part of your sort of DNA, if you will. Second question I have for myself is, and for you as well, is what was going on when you realized that there was no turning back? Now, this is a really interesting question to ask others, and I also for asking myself. For me, when I really went full time in 2006, and I had really sort of hit the ground running, it happened very quickly. After probably, I'd say, about 6 months into it, I had sort of taken on a client/job that really, no, actually it wasn't even 6 months. It was really more 2 months. Really, honestly. I had left the corporate environment I was working in to go work for this other digital company that we actually just didn't work out. But the things I was doing for the company, I was still doing as a freelancer for myself. So basically what happened was, when we didn't really work out personality-wise, I was really facing a choice where I could either go back into the hotel environment, the corporate environment, or I could use this as an opportunity to really go full time into my business. And I made the decision to give it everything I had. I made the decision at that moment that I would rather, if I'm going to struggle, I'd rather struggle to create and build something that I want to do than to struggle with something that I knew I absolutely did not want to continue doing. And it was a risk. And it was a risk that had a lot of ups and a lot of downs, but it was a risk I was glad I took because I stood my ground. And I'll even take it a step further. Before I actually decided to even leave the job that I had, very vividly, I remember sitting in a coffee shop. It was a Borders Books in West Hollywood. And I was so depressed and so tired of doing what I was doing. I just really, really, really wanted to get out of that job. And I was sort of at my wit's end at that point because I just felt like something was breaking and it was becoming physically and emotionally and mentally impossible for me to keep doing that job. So I was sitting in a Borders Books on the way to work, and I was just sitting there almost in tears because I was just so miserable. And I just said, I said, I just can't do this anymore. I cannot do this anymore. And I was like, whomever, God, universe, higher, whatever, give me an answer because I can't do this anymore. And I remember it so vividly. I just heard something very, very simply say to me, tell her you're leaving. And at that moment, I thought, tell her I'm leaving. What does that mean? And I heard it again. And I stayed quiet for a second. And I had to think. And then I thought, okay, I think it means my boss, which was a woman. And I said, and I was going to ask another question. This is all going on in my head, not verbally out loud. And it was, you'll get no more information until you do that. And that's all I heard. And something washed over me in that moment that felt so clear that it seems like if I don't do this, I can't complain anymore about my circumstance. I don't know where this is going. I don't know where I'm going. I don't know really anything. I just know that I have to follow this instruction. So I got up and I got in my car and I drove a few blocks to where I was working. And that sort of calmness just sort of washed over me and it stayed with me. And as the closer I got to my job, the freer I felt. And then I walked into the area where I was working and I punched in, and my boss at the time had her back to me. And I said to her, she asked me how I was, and I said, I'm fine. But the next words out of my mouth was, we have to talk. And I'm not going to say the exact words she said because I don't want to swear on the podcast, although that may end up happening. But anyway, she turned around and she looked at me and she said, if you tell me that you're getting ready to quit, I'm going to kick your blank. And I started laughing because she and I had not spoken at all about me leaving. And it was in that moment, the way she responded to me, it was a confirmation that I was on the right path. I did not know how it was going to work out. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't even know when I was leaving. I wasn't giving a formal notice. I was just saying, I got to leave. I can't do this anymore. So we sat down and we had a discussion about it. And all I kept saying to her was, and I literally said it like this. I said, I don't know where I'm going. I don't even know exactly when I'm leaving. This isn't necessarily even a formal resignation. But I said it exactly like this. I said, I was told to say, tell her you're leaving. And that's all I know right now. And she never asked me, who told you that? She never asked me that question. So the fact that she didn't ask the question, and she actually, without me actually coming in and saying or having a discussion that I was going to leave, I knew that I was in alignment with wherever I was going to go next. And then within 2 weeks of me saying or making what I say, that declaration, this other digital company approached me. And I went in for one interview and got the job. And I was out of the place I was at that was making me miserable within 3 weeks. So for me, when I went to that other company and then that didn't work out, I had left the other company I was with on good terms. And so I could still come back. But once I knew once I got out of there was no going back. And so when I went to the other company that I had left the job for, and then that company and I didn't work out, I had the option. The door was open for me to go back. I couldn't do it. I had gotten a taste of what it was like to be free, and I didn't want to give that up. So I doubled down. I had a skill. I was already, had a couple of people I was working with, and I just continued. And I continued to take steps in the direction of what I wanted, even when I knew or did not know how it was going to work out. So for me, that was the moment when I knew that there was no turning back. Moving on to the third and last question. Knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your younger entrepreneurial self? Knowing what I know now, I would really say the same thing I just said in that second piece. I would answer that question the same way. Being an entrepreneur, being self-employed, however you want to label it, it really requires faith. It requires trust. It requires you to step into doing things in a way that we're not taught in our traditional school educational system to do things, where you wait for someone to give you permission to do something. You raise your hand for the teacher to call on you. You ask, is it okay for me to go here or do there? If you want to take time off from your job, you have to ask permission. The whole structure is all based on asking for permission to be able to do or communicate or express yourself. And when you decide to take this road, this journey, it's not a place where you're going to be asking permission. You have to just take action. And the response to what your actions are will tell you if they're the right actions for you or, otherwise. So what I would say to my younger entrepreneurial self is stop waiting for permission. You are the only one that can give you that permission. You need to trust yourself that you can take action and that you will respond and pivot accordingly based on the response that you get. You have to be patient, because this journey, as much as people want to go out, people in the marketing arena want to go out and say, the overnight success, that's BS. There's no overnight success. I even have a quote that I say inside of the free gift that I have for you, the 57 Ways gift, is there is no such thing as an overnight success. The only thing that should happen overnight is sleep. You have to be willing to be patient with the process, be patient with yourself, understand that you're creating something starting with you. And that's why I say, as I said at the top of the show, is I want the focus to be on creating you, not just the thing that you're selling. Because you're going to have to really shake off all of those rules about asking for permission or waiting for someone to say it's okay for you to write that book or to launch that program or to do that whatever thing it is that you're going to do that you actually are exchanging money for. Waiting to ask for the sale, waiting to go and speak to that group or that organization or ask to be interviewed on that podcast or whatever, or to start that podcast or to do that Facebook Live or to do that webinar or whatever it is. You cannot wait for someone to give you permission, because it's not coming. You're the only one that can give yourself permission to do what it is that you want and need to do. And you're going to have to respond accordingly to the feedback that you get. And trust that even though you may not know all of the steps, and I guess the best advice I would give my younger self is to stop worrying about how it's all going to unfold. As a matter of fact, the more you try to give yourself the whole plan, the more I'd almost say 99% assured that you're going the wrong direction. As I shared that story about, I made that declaration to my boss at that time when I didn't know where I was going. This is really how this journey works. You get one piece, you take action on that piece. You get another piece, you take action on that piece. And to me, that's even the most sane way to do this, because if you're trying to get it all figured out, get all the I's dotted and all the T's crossed, You're going to marry yourself to a plan that you don't know if it's the right plan. And as I said before, it's most likely not the right plan because you're working with people from all over the place, and you never know that one person could come into your life and share one thing with you that could totally shift where you're going and the direction that you're focusing on. So I would tell my younger self to really stop trying to control, listen or pay attention to urgings, promptings, guidance. Take one step and wait for the next piece. Take one step, wait for the next piece. Trust yourself and be patient. So to recap the 3 questions, and if you would like to answer one, maybe just answer one of the questions, I'm going to send you to a link here where you can go and record yourself. You can actually do it on the computer, on the phone, and you can record yourself giving your answer, and I may feature on a future episode of the podcast. So the 3 questions are: when was the exact moment when you knew you wanted to be an entrepreneur? Another question is, what was going on when you realized there was no turning back, if you've been at this for a while or just starting? And third is, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give your younger entrepreneurial self? So if you would like to answer one of those questions, visit my website at getpaidforyourcreativity.com/talk to me. So that's getpaidforyourcreativity.com/talk to me. To access the resources mentioned in today's podcast, you can find it on the show notes page on getpaidforyourcreativity.com/001 for episode number 1. You'll also find on that page the link to ask or to actually answer one of the 3 questions that I asked today, which could possibly have you featured on the future episode of the podcast. That's also available on that page as well. If you want to go directly to that link to address one of those 3 questions that I posed today, you can find that at getpaidforyourcreativity.com/talk to me. So with that said, this concludes the first episode of the Creatorpreneur podcast. On episode number 2, which is already available for you to download immediately on either platform that you're listening to this episode on. That's going to be episode number 2. And on that one, I'm talking about believing in yourself to create the life and business that you want. So you can listen to that right now, and I'll see you over on that episode. Until then, this is Rodney Washington, your host, signing off. We have entered the age of creative self-employment. In the new economy, people are creating true security for themselves. That's why I believe there's never been a better time in history to monetize your gifts. So if you're ready to take control of your financial and creative future, I have something for you. It's my free audio and PDF program, 57 Ways to Monetize Your Gifts and Create True Security for Yourself. And you can get that at my website, getpaidforyourcreativity.com/57 ways gift.